Like, I had to get close to my speakers, but that won't be happening during
Okay.
the.
Okay. Fine. Yeah.
So unfortunately, I have to be somewhere. So can I start?
So whenever you're ready, as soon as you start, I'll hit the timer.
Okay. Yeah, I'll start now. So first of all, thank you for letting me be a part of this debate. The argument I'm going to be discussing today is the Kalam cosmological argument for the existence of God, which is a two-stage argument that aims to show that God exists. By the term God, I mean a divine being. A divine being is defined as personal, worthy of worship, a creator of the universe, who knows all things which happen in reality, who is the greatest of all beings. If such a being exists, then atheism is false. So the Kalam has two stages. First stage of the Kalam aims to establish that the universe had a cause. The second stage of the Kalam aims to establish that the cause must be a divine entity. It's reasonable to believe that the cause is a divine entity. So on to the first stage of the argument, which aims to establish that the universe had a beginning. Premise 1, the universe began to exist. Premise 2, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. Stage 2 of the argument, which is the more interesting, salient part of the argument. Stage 2 of the argument is that the universe had a cause. If the universe had a cause, the cause has divine properties. Conclusion, divine being likely exists, or it's reasonable to believe a divine being exists. So on to the first premise. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Let's call this principle the causal principle. So again, the causal principle is just whatever begins to exist has a cause. Many atheists deny the first premise of the argument that whatever begins to exist has a cause. But this causal principle is so enmeshed in human reasoning that its denial seems to be patently absurd. For instance, the atheist philosopher Kai Nielsen illustrated this with the following scenario. Imagine you suddenly hear a loud bang and you ask, who made that noise? And imagine someone else responds, nothing. Nothing made that noise. It just happened. You wouldn't accept that. You'd be wondering whether such a person was honest, rational, or whether what he says was intelligible or understandable to begin with. Or suppose a rabbit popped out of a thin air. There wasn't even a magician around. The rabbit just popped out. Well, such a scenario seems even more absurd than a magician creating a rabbit, because there's no magician. The rabbit just popped out of thin air. The atheist who denies the first premise, the causal premise, is asking us to accept that not only chairs, not only humans, but a whole collection of things, which includes electrons, black holes, chairs, and a countless other things called a universe, could pop out of nothing for no reason at all. As William Lane Craig puts it, prior to the universe, there wasn't even the possibility that the universe could exist, because prior to the universe, there was nothing. As another atheist philosopher so succinctly put it, if claims like these were made outside of the seminar room or the academic circles, there would be evidence of clinical derangement. Now, sure, intuitions are defeasible. Maybe things could pop into existence from nothing for no reason at all. Maybe we should let science and experience dictate our philosophizing. But science and experience only confirms this deeply embedded human intuition. For instance, this principle is not only simple, it has predictive success. So for instance, the success of science depends on the principle that things beginning to exist have causes. Just look around you. We observe events have beginnings, and scientists assume that natural events like tornadoes, rain, diseases, lightning have causes. Next, they formulate a hypothesis about what the cause might be, and invariably they observe that these things which begin do have causes. So there's an enormous amount of inductive or observational evidence which supports the causal principle. But maybe this principle is violated at the quantum level. Not so. When we move to the quantum microscopic level, the principle is only confirmed. Quantum events have causes, specifically interaction with a measuring apparatus, causes quantum waves to collapse into particles, so there's a cause. Uranium-235 decays because of the strong nuclear force, So it has a cause, the strong nuclear force. When we move to the grand scale, that is the scale of the universe, the principle is also further confirmed. Stars begin to form not causelessly, without a cause, but because of accretions of interstellar gas. Star clusters began to form because not causelessly, but because stars move together. Even objects observed at the very edge of the universe, like HD1, which is a galaxy observed 13 billion years away, they also have causes. They're made up of supermassive black holes. Around them, there are stars. So it doesn't matter if we move from the microscopic level to the universe level, to the large scale. This principle is only confirmed by observational evidence. Also, it doesn't matter how many objects begin to exist. Objects have causes. It doesn't matter if we're talking about one dog or a trillion dogs or a quadrillion dogs. So scale and the number of objects doesn't seem to make any difference at all to the causal principle. But the difference between individual objects in the universe is just in terms of scale and the number of objects involved. So there's no reason at all why we should expect that things can begin to exist when it comes to an entire universe, yet things have causes when it comes to objects which constitute the universe. Now, this entails that this principle is strongly supported by observational or scientific evidence. So far, my account is simple, completely unmysterious, and accounts for all of our observations. Furthermore, if things can begin uncaused, then we should expect things to begin uncaused in the universe all the time. Scientists shouldn't have the expectation that they should find a cause of phenomenon because things can just begin uncaused. We shouldn't expect tigers, squirrels, Eskimo villages to not just pop into existence in front of us all the time. After all, there is no reason why they shouldn't. There's no principle an atheist can appeal to which entails other things shouldn't pop into existence because there's nothing pre-existing the universe according to them. Therefore, nothing ensuring other things can't pop into existence the first moment the universe exists. So the first moment the universe exists, there's no property of the universe which can ensure that other things can't pop into existence at the same time. They might say the first state of the universe has some special property P, which is what ensures other things can't pop into existence. But the special property is too late because it exists simultaneously with other things that could have began to exist uncaused. If the special property P exists simultaneously with other things that could have begun to exist uncaused, it can't prevent these things from beginning to exist. I'm just going to give you an example. Suppose a causally necessary condition for a fire is oxygen. If fire can begin uncaused, the fact that there's no oxygen is not going to prevent the existence of a fire, because fire doesn't have any causally necessary conditions if it can begin uncaused. Therefore, the lack of oxygen is not going to prevent fires from beginning. So there's no reason why in a universe in which things can begin uncaused, things like fires shouldn't just pop into existence all the time. Now, there are many avenues the atheists might take to respond to these arguments. The first objection is, A, we don't observe things beginning to exist. Rather, everything is just a rearrangement of some pre-existing material. I find this reply very puzzling, to say the least. Are we really supposed to believe that my opponent Sasha existed forever and he never began? Or trees didn't begin, or tigers never began, or the species tiger never existed? Moreover, my opponent Sasha has a thought right now, which he didn't have a couple of seconds ago, and it was caused by a previous thought. Now, he can say this thought didn't begin, but I don't think he wants to say that. Or he can say his thoughts don't cause each other, in which case he's just not a rational human being. So, even more to the point, it is a fact that physicists like Sean Carroll think that material objects or space itself is emergent from some underlying non-material substance. So, now not going to quote his blog or his Stanford website, but he thinks that even space itself or material objects are emergent from some underlying non-material thing, non-material entity. So it's just not true that all things are just rearrangement of some prior existing material substance, because whatever space emerges from is a non-material substance. The upshot of this is that both in everyday practice, we observe things beginning to exist, and they do have causes. His second objection might be, it's not true that science provides inductive evidence for the causal principle, because it provides equal evidence for the principle that everything begins to exist, has a cause except the universe. But notice, this seems to be tantamount to special pleading. He might say, science provides equal evidence to the principle that things have causes, as to the principle that all things have causes except the beginning of the universe. But this is like saying all emeralds are green except emeralds unobserved in dark caves. It just seems to be a more complex hypothesis than the simple hypothesis that all emeralds are green. If we observe 1,000 emeralds, it provides more confirmation to the hypothesis that all emeralds are green than to the hypothesis that all emeralds except emeralds in dark, unexplored caves are green. Now, on to premise 2. Premise 2 is the universe began. So the way I'm going to argue for this is the following. We observe in reality a series of events. For instance, I'm speaking right now, which is an event. I was born, that's an event. The earth began, that's an event. So we know that there's a series of events in reality. Now, either these events began or they didn't begin. The two ways to avoid the beginning is either an infinite regress or causation, which occurs in a circle. So again, either the two ways to avoid a beginning is either an infinite regress or causation, which occurs in a closed loop. But it's not the case that causation occurs in a closed loop, and it's not the case that infinite regresses occur, therefore the universe must have had a beginning. So I'm going to give several different arguments for the idea that causation cannot occur in a closed loop. Now, there's a principle that nothing can cause itself. If the first event in the universe is a cause of the last event, which is a cause of the first event, this is an example of unintelligible self-causation. For instance, the science fiction writer Lester Del Rey, in his novel Wind Between the Worlds, comes up with the following scenario. Imagine you travel back in time to when you were 5 years old, and you give yourself a time machine. The fact that you traveled back in time explains why you have a time machine, and the fact that you had a time machine as a child explains why you could travel back in time. So this is obviously unintelligible. Just think about the explanation why you have a time machine is because you traveled back in time to give yourself a time machine, and the explanation for why you had the time machine in the future is because you had the time machine in the past. Now, I don't think what? 2 minutes? I only have 2 minutes left? Oh, crap. So we can reject circular causation. What about infinite regress? Oh my God, I'm going to have to really... What about an infinite regress? I want to... okay. Well, infinite regresses result in logical contradictions and physical contradictions. One of the physical contradictions would be that, according to the second law of thermodynamics, randomness is always increasing in the universe. Randomness is can only have a finite value, but if randomness has been increasing infinitely, it should have reached a zero. We don't observe that, therefore the universe couldn't have existed forever. I have two different logical arguments, but I can't give that right now. Finally, what is the reason to believe that the cause of the universe must be a personal agent? Two different arguments. First is that this entity must have libertarian free will. The reason is that the cause of the universe must be beginningless and eternal. If it's beginningless and eternal, then if the cause is sufficient for the effect, then the universe must exist eternally. But the universe isn't, which means that whatever caused the universe whatever determined the cause of the universe shouldn't have sufficiently determined it, and such an event must have been able to keep itself from causing the universe. Now, the only thing we're able to think of which has these properties is an agent with libertarian free will. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to really talk fast now. The second argument. By the way, can I have 2 minutes of like?
That's time.
Oh, come on! Can I finish like 2 minutes?
Well, that is time. If your opponent is happy to concede the time to you, then maybe. But actually, sorry, I apologize. We agreed that there wouldn't be any extensions.
Wait, Sasha, can you concede 2 minutes to me?
I'm not doing changes to the debate
Yes, sir. Wait, no,
midway the debate.
Okay, that's
like
fine.
a-
That's fine.
that's
It's gonna
It's
be
like
brought
a
up.
really strange request. I'm sorry.
No,
It's
that's
gonna
fine.
be
So you
brought
don't
up during cross examination.
Yeah, perfect. That's fine. All right. Oh, sorry. So let me just set the timer for you, Sasha. Bear with me 1 second. Whenever you're ready, the time will start when you begin.
Okay.
Wait,
Sorry,
can we mute? Can we mute
can I?
mics? Can everyone else mute their mic? Aga, do you mind muting your mic?
Do you mind if I just quickly go to the bathroom? Sorry.
Yes. Fine.
Can I just finish when he's in the bathroom?
Well, I think we agreed to the rules, Aga, and then she won't be here to hear your arguments nor respond. So I don't think it would make sense.
That's fine. I'm just gonna finish the argument during cross examination.
That's great.
Okay. Sorry about that.
All right. So
Okay.
when you begin, I'll start the time.
Sure. Let me just get this set up. Okay, perfect.
2 minute warning. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm ready now. Okay. So first, I'd like to thank the judges and my debate opponent for making this event possible. Today's topic is whether the KALAM cosmological argument is sound, and I'm taking the negative position on the issue. So let's start with the form of the argument. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. So from that, we go to the universe had a cause. Then if the universe had a cause, then the cause must be divine. And from that, we get that the universe had a divine cause. Okay. So I'm going to start by analyzing the notion of beginning to exist. So what does it take for some entity to begin to exist? So let's say for the universe as an example. So the universe begins at some time t if t is the first time at which the universe exists. This is just getting at the intuitive idea that if something doesn't have a first moment, then it didn't begin to exist. Second, the universe is not fundamentally atemporal, or put another way, the universe couldn't exist without time. So this is something that Dan Linford dubbed the modal condition for the beginning of the universe, and I'll spell it out in a bit more detail in a second. So those are the two basic requirements, which I think are very solid for a proper analysis of beginning to exist. There are two other potential requirements which have been defended by William Lane Craig. So I will mention them. I think they're worth acknowledging. So the third one is that the A theory of time is true. So the idea is that if eternalism, the B theory, is true, then things don't genuinely begin to exist. They're more like points on a ruler. And the beginning of the universe is like the first meter on a meter stick. And lastly, Craig offered the idea that for something begins to exist, the actual world can't contain a state of affairs involving its timeless existence. Now, this last condition I reject. If my opponent wants to incorporated into his analysis of beginning to exist. I'm happy to talk about why I reject it, but for now I'll just put that to the side. Okay, so just so we're clear, the goal of the proponent of the Kalam is to analyze beginning to exist in such a way that the universe began to exist, but God didn't begin to exist. That's an important point of acknowledgement. We didn't hear an analysis from Agamemnon, so I'm not sure what he has to say on that. Okay, so let me say more about this second condition, the modal condition. Why would a being that's fundamentally atemporal, why would being fundamentally atemporal make something not have a beginning? So first consider, as an example, God's relation to time. If time is part of creation and God could have chosen to not create, then there are possible worlds in which God exists, but time doesn't. So there's a sense in which God is explanatorily prior to time. And this is the key idea. God already exists when time starts. There's something that would suffice for God's existence, even if time never started. That's why you can say that he already exists when time starts. In contrast, consider my desk. My desk couldn't exist without time. It is fundamentally a temporal entity. And even let's say if God had decided to create my desk as the first item in the universe, it wouldn't be true that that desk already existed when time started. Okay, so now a more relevant example to my case. Let's consider a physical theory on which time emerges from some more fundamental physical structure. But given a different configuration of the structure, time wouldn't have emerged. So a different configuration of a physical structure, you can think of that as a state of matter. So, or analogously to a state of matter. So like liquidity or solidness. Okay, so that physical structure is likewise explanatorily prior to time, and it also already exists when time starts. And there are physical models which are sort of in line with that. Agamemnon has mentioned that Sean Carroll has talked about the idea of, from Sean Carroll, that space is emergent. Well, he also talked about the idea that time is emergent. So, that's like one example of a physical structure where time is not fundamental. Okay, so with those conditions in mind, we can consider some ways in which the universe could fail to have a beginning by not meeting one of the conditions. So how could it fail to meet the first condition, namely having a first moment? So one, the past is infinite. Two, the universe forms a temporal loop. And three, time doesn't have a global direction. If time lacks a global direction, there's no telling whether the first moment really is the first. How could it fail to meet the second modal condition of not being fundamentally atemporal? Well, it's by being fundamentally atemporal. So a view in which time is emergent or functionally realized by some non-temporal structure and that structure is sufficient for counting as the universe. On that kind of idea, the universe wouldn't have begun to exist. Okay, three, failing this third condition, which I marked as a potential condition suggested by Craig, which was the A theory requirement. Well, it could fail if the B theory of time is true. So now moving to the main part of my case, which is why is the argument unsound? Okay, so for the argument to be sound, all of its premises, that means their conjunction, needs to be true. I mean, it also needs to be valid, but that's not in contention here. I'm just gonna assign a probability of 1 to the argument being valid. So how do you get the probability of a conjunction being true? Well, you get that by multiplying the probabilities of the conjuncts. So the probability of getting tails twice while tossing a fair coin is 25% because it's just 0.5 squared, or 0.5 times 0.5. Okay, so given what I said about validity, the probability of the conjunction of the premises being true is in effect the probability of the argument being sound. And if that probability ends up being higher than 0.5, the argument is likely sound. If it's lower than 0.5, then it's likely unsound. Okay, so at which point would the argument would likely be sound? Well, assuming each premise ends up being equiprobable, each premise would need at least 0.8 probability, because 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8 or 0.8 cubed is just above the threshold, namely it's 0.51. So that's 51% if the premises are that strongly supported. Okay, how do we determine the probability? Well, it's by prior probabilities and the evidence that can be provided for the premises. So let's start with priors. Priors tell us how much a proposition constrains the possibility space. The more things it rules out, the less likely it is to be true, because there are more ways for it to be false. There is no commonly accepted straightforward algorithm for turning the content of an expression into a probability. So for the purposes of the debate, I'm going to appeal to the principle of indifference, which equally splits the probabilities between mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive options. So, and as before evidence is introduced. So, I mean, the coin toss or a dice roll is a good example of an application of the principle. If we have no preference between any of the sides of a die, we just distribute the probability equally amongst the sides of the die. So the premises and their negations meet the requirements for the principle's application, because each premise and it combined with its negation exhausts the possibility space, and they're mutually exclusive. And given that for each premise, we would just assign a probability of 0.5. There are, of course, known problems with the principle of indifference, but I think that its usage here is reasonably favorable for the proponent of the KALAM, because I think the premises significantly constrain the possibility space. So I've outlined how the universe having a beginning, what it rules out. It rules out quite a lot. My opponent also spelled out what he takes divine being to require. So if we consider the premise that if there is a first cause, or if the universe is a cause, the cause must be divine. The constraints on that possibility is that it needs to be personal, worthy of worship, greatest of all beings, and omniscient. I mean, you could probably add more there, right? It needs to be a spaceless mind. Anyway, so these premises, I would say, quite strongly constrain the possibility space. So if this is right, then the probability of soundness of the KALAM, as far as the priors go, is 0.125. That's just 0.5 cubed. So we're starting with a fairly low number. Okay, so the upshot of this is that unless the premises enjoy strong evidential support, then the argument is probably unsound. And I'll contend that whatever the evidence can be offered for the truth of the premises is negated by just as strong evidence for the falsity of their conjunction. Okay, so what evidence do I think can reasonably be offered for the premises? Well, I think there's maybe some reason to take the inductive support for premise one seriously. So the idea that all observed beginnings had causes. So I think that this is matched by the following considerations, which also enjoy strong inductive support. So one, every material object that has a cause has a material cause. So this sort of rules out creatio ex nihilo. Second, every concrete object has at least a partial causal explanation. This is likewise all the time confirmed with experience, but it would also require that God has a cause. Every causal relation is temporal. Depending on how you spell out God's relation to the temporal argument, temporal order, that might turn out incompatible with the case for the KALAM. Fourth, every event has a preceding event. This is also strongly inductively supported and suggests an infinite past. And fifth, every mind has a body. And just to highlight a point, every mind has a body. This is consistent with dualism. It's just saying that there are no disembodied minds, but that goes against the idea of a divine cause. So that's how I think the inductive support for premise one can be matched with other considerations. what about intuitive support for premise one? So the causal principle is intuitively true. Well, I think there are other equally strong intuitions which match these considerations. I think it's intuitively obvious that beginnings of material objects require material causes, but this again goes against the idea of creatio ex nihilo. And this is not as double counting evidence, just as the proponent of the KALAM is not double counting
2
evidence.
minutes.
When they say that there's inductive support for the causal principle and there's a strong intuition for it. I'm saying there's strong inductive support for the idea that material beginnings require material causes, and it's also intuitively supported. Second intuition, it's intuitively true that causal relations are temporal. This again might turn out to be false depending on how the proponent of the argument spells out God's relation to time. Okay, there's other purported pieces of evidence for the premises, but I don't really feel like I could find a way to match them because I don't consider them successful. So these are Locke's modus tollens argument, thought experiments like Hilbert's Hotel or Grim Reapers. I don't think they really move the needle, so I couldn't really offer matching evidence against it because I don't consider them evidence. So given the proposed assignment of priors, the argument starts at a low probability and requires strong evidential support. However, as I have argued, any such support is matched by equally strong evidence against it. In light of this, I conclude the argument to be unsound. Okay, thank you for your attention.
You have 40 seconds unless you want to cede the time.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah. That was my entire opinion, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now we're gonna move to question section where each of you get 5 minutes, and you must allow the opponent at least 30 seconds before interrupting them, whether or not you feel like they're accurately responding to the question you've asked or not. Agamemnon, you're gonna get to sorry, is the idea that Sasha you get to question Agamemnon first, or was it that?
No, he gets to question me first, and then I get to question him.
Perfect. Agamemnon, whenever you're ready, actually, bear me 1 second. Let me just set the timer. Yeah, whenever you're ready, you ask your first question. I'll start the time.
Sure. Do you think that, are you considering that the initial state of the universe is timeless?
No.
And
that was just me. That was just me laying out the waste, and which the second premise could turn out to be false. And that tells us something relevant about, how we assign the priors. It tells us how much it constrains the possibility space.
a universe, whatever begins has a cause? How do you think a timeless initial state?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, you said that that's the second way. Sorry, that's a way the second purpose can turn out to be false, is that the initial state of the universe could be timeless.
No, it's not the.
But a timeless thing doesn't begin to exist. So how do you think that contradicts the premise that whatever begins to exist has a cause?
No, it's not that the initial state is timeless. The idea is that the universe is fundamentally atemporal. So there's a part of the universe which would suffice for its existence, which is atemporal. And so the idea is then, given our configuration of the universe, right? We live in a temporal world, and from the first moment, the universe exists in this state. It's just given a different configuration, the universe could have been timeless and like an adjacent and like a closest possible world.
It seems to me that if you're saying that if the initial state of the universe is timeless, you're just conceding the point.
I'm not saying it's timeless. The initial state is
timeless. No, I'm saying, okay, the initial state is timeless.
No, the initial state is temporal.
So the initial state is temporal. So what state of the universe is timeless? Sorry, I'm a little bit.
It's not like a temporal section of the universe that's timeless. It's a part of the universe, right? So you mentioned this idea of space being emergent from some more fundamental physical structure, right? Imagine that time was emergent in that same way, right? The idea is that that more fundamental part of the universe would have sufficed for its existence, but we
You
just
mean
happen to live in a universe where that arrangement was such that we live in a temporal world, right?
is that saying the cause of the universe is a non-temporal, is atemporal?
No, look, it's not about causality, right? Like, take God's knowledge, right? God's knowledge, unless you're a necessitarian, you will think has some contingent aspects. Yet God decides what he does in our world, right? So it's something like the fundamental configuration of God. The configuration of God in our world is such that he will do, he will create or whatever, right? But in an adjacent possible world, he might have chosen to not create. It's just about the arrangement of the thing that's fundamental.
Yeah. Now, you said that it's possible that the universe emerged from something atemporal and something spaceless. But you
Yeah, like
also
a wave
said
function.
that science supports the idea that every causal relation is temporal. I don't understand how you, at the same time, can say that every causal relation is temporal, yet the universe emerged from something atemporal and
Yeah, because
spaceless.
emergence is not a temporal relation.
Okay, so emergence is not a temporal relation. What exactly do you mean by that?
A minute left, guys.
It seems to me that emergence is a paradigm example of a temporal relation because it's an example of supervenience, meaning that if X emerges from X can only exist as long as Y exists. So
Does
it
also
is a
in time.
temporal relation.
Supervenience is the idea that there can be no changes in one set of properties without a change in another set of properties.
Okay.
You don't need to involve time
question.
in that.
Sure, last question. You said every mind has a body that's supported by science. So are you saying
No, it's supported by induction.
Are you saying physicalism is a metaphysical? Sorry, physicalism is a scientific hypothesis?
Well, those two are completely unrelated. Also, I'm not saying it's supported by science. I'm saying it's supported by induction.
So then, wait, isn't that just the same thing as saying it's just supported
That's
by?
time. 1 second. Sorry, that's time. Do you want to respond? Do you want to let him get his last question and you respond to it, Sasha? Or do you want to move to
Sure, yeah, I can go over the last
Yeah,
question.
go on, Agamemnon. I'll offer you the
Yeah,
same.
seems to me when you say every mind has a body and that's supposed to be supported by supported inductively, all you're saying is that physicalism, the idea that every mind requires a body, is a scientific hypothesis. It's supposed to be discovered something through. It's supposed to be discoverable through observation. But that's supposed to be the paradigm example of a metaphysical hypothesis. So you think physicalism is not a metaphysical hypothesis, a scientific one?
Yeah, so this just seems like a complete confusion, right? One, I didn't say that it's scientific support. I said inductive support. And you can have inductive support for metaphysical thesis. And that's something you've demonstrated by arguing for the causal principle, which is a metaphysical principle on inductive grounds, right? Two, that principle doesn't require physicalism, right? Like varieties of physicalism say that, let's say identity theory, right? The mind is identical to some brain states, right? Mental states are identical to brain states. What the principle I laid out doesn't require that. It just says that for every mind, there is a body. That's consistent with dualism. And I made that explicit in my presentation.
I'm gonna have to curtail it there, though.
I was
So yeah, no, I know, but I feel like Agamemnon wanted to get you to expand on that. All right, cool. So whenever you're ready, ask your first question. I'll start the timer.
I'll just get some water. Sorry.
Just wondering how he can observe a mind.
Wait, your time is
Yeah,
done.
yeah. If you wouldn't mind keeping your thoughts to yourself, Agamemnon, until we're done. Wait, hold
So
on. Wait, you about to? Okay, sorry. Whenever you're ready.
no, fuck. Okay, I need to restart my app because it's lagged out again. Sorry, just give me 1 second.
All right.
Sorry about that. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are
You are
audible.
audible.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm ready to yeah, I'm ready to start now if you're ready.
Yeah, it's going to be a 1 minute warning, and time will start when you ask your first question.
Okay. Yeah, so you've mentioned the idea of the violations of a causal principle being unintelligible, incoherent, right? You've used those words. So can you expand on what you mean by those terms?
Yeah. So the idea that things can pop into existence from nothing, absurd. So for suppose there's a rabbit just popping out of thin air. Well, that seems even more absurd than a magician creating a rabbit out of thin air because there's not even a magician.
Okay, but that wasn't. Oh, sorry. Do you have more to say?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems, first of all, it just seems like an intuitive principle. Now, sure, intuitions are defeasible, but we don't see this intuition being defeated, not at the microscopic level, not at the scale of the universe, not when it comes to a single object, not when it comes to a trillion objects. So,
Okay, so
so
I just wanna.
the burden of proof is
I
on
think
you to
no,
provide evidence.
that was your 30 seconds, I think, to respond. But the question was, what do you mean by incoherent / unintelligible? Because you use those terms to describe violations of the principle. So I'm not asking you to give me examples or say, what arguments you have for it. I'm just asking you what you mean by unintelligible here.
Yeah, I just mean absurd, absurd, and the burden of proof is on you to provide evidence. To provide counter evidence, like some sort of scientific evidence that it's not an absurd idea. I mean, your idea is that things can oomph into existence or pop into existence from nothing for no reason at all.
Okay, so yeah, so by unintelligible / incoherent, and those I take something which I can't make sense out of, right? I just don't understand the words. You just mean it's absurd, right? Because I mean, it's coherent to me, the idea that an elephant just appears in my room right now, right? I might not think it's likely or even possible, but I understand what it's saying. So just wanted to get clarity on that. Do you have any specific account of causality in mind when you're describing the causal principle?
Except Humean causation.
So just constant conjunction.
No, I would say more like a generation principle. So a generation principle would be something like a defoliant causes a plant to die. The defoliant actually generates its effect. So that's what I mean by cause. A cause actually is responsible for the effect; it generates its effect.
Okay, I mean that's maybe sounds like some power account, but whatever. Okay, is the causal principle framed in terms of sufficient causal conditions or necessary causal condition? You've mentioned that concept. The other is just is any cause whatsoever required, or do the conditions need to be sufficient?
God's choice is sufficient for the effect.
No, but I'm asking, is the principle framed in terms of necessary causal condition or sufficient causal conditions?
I'm not exactly sure about that.
What do you don't know what the principle is saying, or you don't understand the question?
No, I'm agnostic on whether it's talking about necessary or sufficient causal condition. I'm inclined to say it's talking about necessary causal conditions because there's some examples of chancy causation or probabilistic causation. So, for instance, quantum events can be an example of probabilistic causation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems to me it has to be framed in terms of necessary causal conditions because
A minute left.
you might say, okay, because you might say that God's creative act to bring the universe about was sorry. Yeah, that was the sufficient condition, but what was the sufficient condition for that act, right? Nothing has changed, right? You mentioned this idea that the cause is initially changeless, so it seems like there can only be a necessary causal condition for that. So now, given that, I don't really see how the principle rules out this idea of chaos, right? Because, I mean, the universe is always going to be around, right? So what exactly is an observation that would falsify this causal principle framed in terms of a necessary causal condition, right? If an Eskimo village just popped into existence out of thin air, we could say that the universe was the necessary causal condition. So do you have a comment on that?
Sorry, I'm not understanding the question. The question is, how does that rule out chaos? What exactly are you?
Do you
Well,
want to? Yeah, hold on. Sorry, just be clear. Ag, you want to respond to that last question, right?
Yeah, just I'm asking a clarifying question. I'm not exactly sure what he's asking me. Can you repeat?
yeah, I will clarify, right? So you said that the denial of the causal principle amounts to saying that, let's say, an Eskimo village could just pop out of nothing, right? But if the principle is just framed in terms of a necessary causal condition, I don't see how it rules it out, right? If an Eskimo village just appeared in my house right now, well, I could just say, yeah, there was a necessary causal condition. It was the universe, right? So I don't see how it rules events like that out.
So are you saying it's intelligible? It makes sense for you to say that Eskimo villages pop into existence from thin air?
I just said the principle doesn't rule it out. I think that's, as much as you
The
get from the
principle
question.
that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Yeah, it does, because if whatever begins to exist has a cause, and Eskimo villages begin without a cause, without even a necessary cause, then sorry, if it's true that whatever begins to exist has to have a necessary cause, then you can't have Eskimo villages pop into existence out of thin air without a necessary cause.
Well, the example was that I'm sorry, I don't know if this is just moving into the discussion section, but the necessary causal condition I specified was the
I
universe.
think we're done with the 5-minute section.
Yeah, that's fine. So now we have like 40 minutes of open discussion, I think.
So okay, so I guess I'm just gonna finish my argument because I wasn't able to.
Wait, but are we? Can can the moderator confirm that we're moving to the discussion section?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Let me just get the timer set up. So it's 40 minutes open discussion. You need to allow your opponent 15 seconds before interrupting if you ask them a question.
Sure.
Yeah, cool. Bear with me.
So I wasn't able to explain. I wasn't fully able to explicate why I think the cause of the
Wait, hold
universe
on.
must.
So essentially, do you want to open with the end of your arguments, Agamemnon?
Yeah,
All right, so just start and I'll hit the
it's
timer.
gonna take like I don't know, like 2 minutes just to finish. So
Okay.
anyway, I wasn't fully able to explicate why I think the cause of the universe must be divine. So essentially, we have two models. The first model is maybe there's a timeless, spaceless, non-minded entity. The other model is that there's a minded entity that's the cause of the universe. Why I think it's a minded entity is because this initial state of reality has to explain the features of reality that we currently encounter ourselves in. So, for instance, it has to explain why there's consciousness, why there's rationality, why the universe was fine tuned for conscious life. It has to explain the existence of the moral domain. It has to explain the existence of why we should do anything, the existence of beauty, and things like that. Now, God is a simple, parsimonious explanation for each of these phenomenon. Um, my opponent can't offer a simple, parsimonious explanation. He's either going to reject the existence of all these things, he's going to reject the existence of free will, rationality, the moral domain, the fine tuning of the universe, etc., 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 or he's going to offer a body double worldview. A body double worldview is going to try to take all the properties of God, subtract mindedness, and assume that was the cause of the universe in order to have an explanatory power. But ultimately, what he's going to be appealing to is an infinite set of propositions to explain why we. So, for instance, the existence of laws of logic, laws of moral principles, which is not only unparsimonious because there's an infinite set of propositions to explain the existence of, for instance, the laws of logic or mathematical laws, as opposed to God, who's just one entity, but it doesn't explain anything because how can a proposition like which exists timelessly since the beginning of the universe, how can that proposition explain why you ought to do something right now? So, for instance, suppose there's a proposition that you should help the poor, which exists timelessly since the beginning of the universe. How can that possibly, why we ought to obey that proposition? Now, there's a straightforward explanation when it comes to the existence of God. God is responsible for all the goods you enjoy, and therefore is responsible for all your joys, all any good that comes to you, and therefore it just seems straightforward that you owe an obligation to a person who's responsible for all the goods you enjoy. Propositions are supposed to be acausal. They're not supposed to cause anything. And if they can't cause anything, they can't influence your beliefs about it. Therefore, they can't explain how you can have knowledge of these moral propositions or logical or mathematical propositions which exist timelessly. Finally, propositions are, yeah, sorry, I think I'm done. Do you mind if I ask Sasha a bunch of questions? Because I had a whole bunch of questions about what he said.
It's an open question. It's
Yeah,
open
and
discussion round. So yeah.
I think the open discussion section shouldn't be an extension of the question round, since it's already an extension of your opening statement. I'd prefer to just, like have a discussion in the open discussion section.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so it seems to me like we've really moved away from what KALAM argument is getting at, right? Like, I mean, what you laid out there is just the moral argument, right? And a few other arguments. So I'm not sure if that's really in the spirit of what we were supposed to discuss.
I don't think I'm moving away from the KALAM. So, for instance, Locke, sorry, what's his name?
Andrew Loke.
Andrew Loke. Andrew Loke, for instance, supports the stage 2 of the KALAM using the fine-tuning argument. Essentially, the KALAM is just saying there's a cause of the universe. The cause of the universe is likely divine. Well, why can't I just say the cause of the universe is likely divine? Because if you invoke a non-divine being, it can't explain any of the features of reality. There's nothing wrong with that. Andrew Loke uses the fine-tuning argument to.
Yeah, I mean, the title of his book is, I think, the KALAM and the fine-tuning arguments revisited. He treats them as separate arguments, but I mean, I don't know. I might discuss that. I think I was pretty interested in what you had to say about that Eskimo village idea, right? So, but I mean, sure, we can circle back on the discussion of all these other things and how we explain them.
Yeah, I have a question about beginning to exist. You said, as far as I understood, you said B theory is incompatible with the KALAM. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I said that this is a requirement suggested by Craig, and I can sort of see the intuition behind it.
Well, I define beginning to exist as anything which has a temporal edge. Even under B theory, there's a temporal edge of the universe. So the universe began to exist. So I just define beginning to exist as anything with a temporal edge. So there's no problem using applying this the KALAM argument using B theory. Do you have any objections to that specific definition?
I mean, you can define it how you want, right? My thought was we come to the table and try to offer conceptual analyses of these notions, right? So I've given you mine, and I said that I kind of see the intuition behind it, right? And I mean, maybe we can just talk about that, right? Like, does it seem as absurd to you that on the B theory, there would just always have been a universe statically existing there, as it does for you to, but on the B theory, on the A theory, the universe just begins to exist, right? Like, do you see the difference in intuition there?
I think you're confusing static existence with B theory. So, for instance, there's a view in B theory called perduritarism. Let me just look up the term. Perduritarism.
Like,
is that you have different properties during different times in the universe. So the universe isn't static, yet the universe has temporal edges. Now, you talked about intuitions. You said William Lane Craig's view
but
makes intuitive sense. Well, to me, the universe having temporal edges as and defining those temporal edges as a beginning and an end makes sense. So I don't see anything wrong with defining a temporal edge as the beginning or an end of the universe if B theory is true.
just perdurantism is not like a competing view of eternalism. It's an explanation of what change is on that view. Right. So just to have clarity on that, but my question was, do you see the difference in intuition in the universe beginning to exist on the B theory and on the A theory? I mean, if
No,
you
I don't.
prefer
I don't see
presentism on internalism.
I don't see the intuition because beginning to exist as I define it is just as Andrew Loke defines it is just anything with temporal edges, as space time just having temporal edges, and yes, the universe has temporal. Even under B theory, universe has temporal edges. So I just don't see a difference in intuition.
Okay,
Now,
I mean that's fine. I have a difference in intuition. Seems like Craig does as well, but sure, we can put that to the side. I again said that these are potential requirements. I stand by the two first requirements I laid out, and we can discuss more of those. But I just want to get back to the issue of this Eskimo village, right? So you said that, and if you're not willing to agree with this, I can argue for why you're sort of forced to agree with it. But the causal principle is framed in terms of necessary causal conditions, right? So it's just something is consistent with the effect coming about. It doesn't guarantee the effect coming about. So I don't see how that sort of principle rules out a really chaotic universe, right? So again, let's say that an Eskimo village just pops into existence inside my house. Well, I could just say that the necessary causal condition for that was my house or the universe, right? And it seems like for any observation we could make that same appeal.
I guess I'm really not tracking. You're saying if an Eskimo village popped into existence in your house, it makes sense to say that the cause of that was your house?
The universe, right? There was the necessary causal condition of the universe, right? I mean, I don't see how the principle rules it out. Just says there needs to be a necessary causal condition. Okay, what's the necessary causal condition? The universe.
Okay. So it makes sense for you to say that Eskimo villages could pop into existence out of thin air.
It's not whether it makes sense to me or not. I'm just saying that your principle doesn't rule it out, and you said it did.
Well, the principle that everything which begins to exist has a cause.
And by that we mean it at least has a necessary causal condition, right? And
Yes,
Eskimo
yes.
village popping into existence doesn't violate it because the necessary
Hold on a second. Hold on. Well, if the principle is false, then things without a necessary cause can pop into existence, right?
No, that doesn't follow.
The causal principle, as you stated it, or as we both agree, is that whatever begins to exist must have a necessary cause, right?
Must have a necessary causal condition.
Yeah. So if it's false, then things can begin to exist without a necessary cause.
I mean, that doesn't exactly follow, but look, I'm just saying that you made a claim that chaos, right? Eskimo villages are ruled out by your account of the causal principle. I'm just showing you that's not the case.
By my account, that everything must have a necessary cause?
Yeah, it must have at least a necessary causal condition. Okay, let's say an Eskimo village, or root beer, or Mozart just start popping into existence, right? Okay, how does the principle rule it out? It seems like there is a necessary causal condition we could appeal to.
I mean,
namely the universe. I mean, you could appeal to God just as well, right? You could say, well, God is there. That's the necessary causal condition. I don't understand how you're ruling that out at all.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not understanding.
So which part is unclear? Because I feel like the steps
like
we can
everything you just said. So you're saying if the causal principle is true, we should still expect chaos?
It's not about whether we should expect it, right? You made the claim that if it were false, things would just pop into existence, right? What we would expect if the principle were false is that my house would be getting filled by rabbits and elephants, right? I'm telling you, yeah, your principle doesn't actually rule it out. Right? Your principle, as we've agreed upon it, is consistent with that happening.
Oh, okay. So the principle that everything which needs needs a cause is consistent with Eskimo villages pop into existence.
That's what the conclusion we've reached.
I don't think we did. you think
which step in
you
reasoning?
think if I say everything requires a necessary cause, is consistent with Eskimo villages?
I mean, I don't know how you to refute. You're just giving me an incredulous stare, right? Like I've laid out the reasoning, right? I told you what the necessary causal condition would be. Doesn't seem like it's ruled out by the principle. Like, what's unclear about that?
So I'm trying to understand. So if we have the principle that everything must require a necessary cause, you think that's consistent? Necessary cause. You think that's consistent with as it's just Eskimo villages popping into existence, even if they don't have a necessary cause?
No, they do have a necessary causal condition, right? I just pointed it out. The necessary causal condition would be the universe or God, right? There's always something accompanying our observations of things, right? I'm just saying, yeah, we can say that whatever accompanies our observations of things at all times, that's the necessary causal condition.
Okay, don't you think that's a completely ad hoc move then?
I don't know what you mean ad hoc, right? Like, you said the principle rules it out. It doesn't. You can modify the principle, or I don't know, argue that with the principle and some other assumptions, you'd have a better theory for like why those things would happen or something. Right? It's just a different claim then.
Yeah, because the initial conditions of the universe presumably constrain what can happen, or God's initial choice can constrain what can happen. But if they constrain what can happen, then things can't just pop out of thin air.
Yeah, you can modify the principle or add some extra assumptions, right? My point was just you said the principle rules it out, right? You said that if the principle were false, all these things would be happening or could be happening. I've shown you why it is not so. Now you can modify your case and we can move on.
Are you saying that if there's initial condition of the universe which is necessary, then that's consistent with things popping out of thin air?
No, it's if the principle is framed in terms of just requiring a necessary causal condition for something to begin, right? That's consistent with complete chaos, right? Rabbits, elephants, and would be popping into my room right now. It doesn't rule it out.
Yeah, but the way you said that's consistent is that there's a necessary condition in the universe which requires that rabbits and things like that pop out of thin air, right?
No, I'm not sure if you understand what I mean by necessary causal condition, right? So it's like if you look at the case of like I don't know, agent-free choices. The point is, if I do something now and you rewind the tape to the time before I did it, and the universe is exactly the same, I could do something else, right? I could have done something different, right? So the state of the universe, the state of me at the time, is not a sufficient causal condition for whatever I did. You might say then, well, isn't that just a violation of the causal principle, right? Like my choice began to exist without a cause. Well, no, it began because it does have a cause, right? Namely me. I'm the necessary causal condition. It just, I don't guarantee the effect. Okay, so that's what the principle is saying. Now, how does that rule out chaos? If the relation I stand towards it, my choice, the universe can stand to root beer and Eskimo villages, right? The universe can just be a necessary causal condition for whatever random thing decides to pop into existence.
Okay. I think I'm starting to understand. So you're saying there's a necessary. It's possible there's a necessary initial condition of the universe, And even if things beginning to exist need a necessary cause, that's still consistent with Eskimo villages popping into existence out of thin air, right?
I didn't say anything about an initial state of the universe, right?
There's a state of the universe. There's a state of the universe.
Yeah, there is a current state of the universe.
Yeah, current state of the universe. So we should not have expectations, even if the principle is true. And there's a necessary part of the universe that things shouldn't pop into existence. Correct?
No, I don't necessary part of the universe. I don't really know. Look,
you said necessary conditions or something like that.
I'm
necessary
saying,
causal.
Say your principle. Yeah. So say your principle is true. It's consistent with a thing popping into existence as long as it has a necessary causal condition. Okay.
Yeah, necessary causal condition.
Let's say the universe, right? And then anything can happen.
Sure. But just for the sake of argument, I'm just going to assume that this necessary condition is inside the universe, it's part of the universe. Essentially, what you're saying is that...
I mean, I said that God could be that causal condition as well, but, you know...
Whatever. For the sake of argument, I'm just going to ignore God for now and just talk about the universe. I don't know if you're actually realizing, but you're giving an argument against your own position. You're saying that if there's some part of the universe which is necessary, be it initial state or some subsequent state, and we have the causal principle, then we shouldn't expect that there are no rabbits popping out of thin air. That's what your argument actually entails.
That's not at all what I'm saying. You're confusing the idea of some part of the universe being necessary, right?
Necessary causal, but I'm just talking about the hypothetical scenario, right? In which case, this necessary causal antecedent.
Being necessary. Sorry,
yeah, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't interrupt.
You interrupted me.
I think 15 seconds.
Okay, guys, pause for 1 second because it's a good time to. Sasha, is there any way you could turn your mic up or speak louder? Some people are complaining they can't hear you.
Sure, let's just move to Discord. Oh wait, we can't do that.
All right, fine. That's fine. So if you can't, it's fine.
I'm sorry. I don't know. Like,
no, that's fine. I can hear you. It's fine. And then, sorry, just quickly. So, who asked the question?
I don't think it's like asking a question. I was in the middle of a sentence, right? And
go ahead.
All right, thank you.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe whatever, right? So, you said there is a necessary part of the universe, or whatever. Right? That's not the type of necessity I'm talking about, right? It's not necessity in the sense that, let's say, God is taken to be necessary. I'm saying necessary causal condition, right? What's necessary for an effect, right? So oxygen, ignition, and fuel. That's like, those are the necessary conditions for a flame to appear, and they're jointly sufficient, right? That's how I'm using necessary. This has nothing to do with like, oh, what if the initial state was necessary or whatever.
Okay, so let's just apply the principle to the universe. Suppose there's a universe and it's supposed that the causal principle is true, that everything which begins to exist must have a necessary cause. You're telling me in such a scenario we shouldn't expect rabbits not to pop out of thin air?
Yeah, well, given how you argued for it, right? So the principle is framed in terms of necessary causal conditions, and seems to me like, well, let's say a rabbit just appears out of nowhere in my room right now. Okay, well, I can say there was a necessary causal condition, the universe. Right? I feel like this is pretty clear.
Okay, there was a necessary causal condition. So under which conditions would you think that we shouldn't expect rabbits to pop out of thin air all the time? Do you have an account?
So, I mean, let's just say that matter and energy can only enter a system from an adjacent system. By system here, I mean like a space-time region. Right, so that sort of rules out this chaotic universe, right? A rabbit is a material object, and it can't just appear inside my house because my house is a space-time region, and the only way for things to get into this space-time region is from adjacent space-time regions.
How would that rule out chaos if you're saying a necessary cause doesn't rule out chaos?
I think I just explained it. I mean, I've given you an explanation about how necessary causal conditions don't rule out chaos. So
okay,
that I thought was pretty clear. And then this idea that matter and energy can only enter a system from an adjacent system. yeah, seems to me like how would it be that chaos is possible, right? If an elephant appears inside my house right now, well, it had to do so from either an adjacent temporal region, right? So it was already there. So, seems like there was a cause, right? The elephant at the previous temporal region, or it sort of walked into my house because it was in an adjacent spatial region. It seems like chaos is ruled out.
Why can't I have a couple of issues with that principle. First of all, it seems to me that principle is just another necessary cause. So if you're saying chaos is not ruled out by necessary causes, since that itself is a necessary cause for things beginning to exist, then you wouldn't rule out chaos, according to your argument. Second, why can't you just have space-time just pop into existence without a cause? Then it's adjacent. Now it becomes adjacent to other space-time regions, and it just transfers its matter and energy into that specific space-time region.
Right. So, I don't really get what you're not getting, right? I've provided you an example of how chaos could obtain given your principle. I've also explained how chaos wouldn't obtain given my principle. So, where do you think the symmetry is? Like, can you give me an example of how you think chaos would ensue given my principle?
Yeah, I think I explained the symmetry. The symmetry is that this principle would just be a necessary cause of chaos not existing. But you already said necessary.
Sorry, go ahead. But I mean, it's not a principle framed in terms of causes, right?
Is it constraining what can and what can't happen in physical reality?
Yeah, that doesn't have to be causal.
So wait. So there's a law. Is this supposed to be some kind of law, or is it just something non-physical?
I mean, let's just say it's something about like explanatory relations. It doesn't matter. The principle doesn't like make a comment on it. I'm just telling you that it doesn't have to be thought of in terms of necessary causal conditions.
So it's just
you can think about it in any other way.
So it's just some descriptive law.
I think the relevant kind of laws here are all going to be descriptive.
But it doesn't cause anything, right?
You can think of it as a causal law, right? If you want. I'm just saying, as I've stated, it doesn't comment on it.
Okay, so let's take the idea that it doesn't cause anything. If it doesn't cause anything, how can it possibly constrain something in physical reality?
By like explanatory relations.
Yeah, but things in physical reality are supposed to have physical causes.
I think that's fairly controversial, right? Like I might go and and say, yeah, take this as a physical law, right? Some sort of physical principle. You can even think of it as a metaphysical principle, if you want, right? I mean, the causal principle is a sort of metaphysical principle, right? So
metaphysical principles are just descriptive. They're not gonna constrain reality. They're not gonna causally constrain reality.
I mean, I don't know what you think. You think that your principle is not descriptive?
Well, causes are not prescriptive. Causes are supposed to be just concrete entities with actual causal powers, which can constrain. So you're saying there's this non-causal. What? So what did you ask me?
I just asked you, do you think your principle is not descriptive?
Yeah, but behind my principle, there are actually causal entities which can explain the way reality could be. Now, what is
but you
behind?
Think it's descriptive.
Well, yes, the causal principle is descriptive. Whatever begins to exist needs a cause.
Too.
It's descriptive, but is there anything causal behind it, like a concrete entity, which ensures that things can't transfer energy, except when they're in adjacent spacetime region?
I told you. You just asked me how would I rule out chaos without the causal principle.
I'd like yes or no answer.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a rule about no interruptions, and there wasn't a rule about you have to answer yes or no.
Yeah, can you give her 15 seconds to respond?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Kind of lost my train of thought here. Yeah, so you asked me how would I rule out chaos without the causal principle, right? I just given you an example of how you would do it. principle is not really framed in terms of causality, right? It doesn't make a comment on it, right? So you can think of it as a causal principle if you want, but you don't have to, right? You could think it describes some other relation that constrains how reality behaves.
Okay, but the principle you're describing is just a principle, a descriptive principle, which doesn't have any causal effects, doesn't have any physical effects. Causally otiose, it's inept, doesn't have any physical effects. But the causal principle I'm describing is based on the idea that there are actually concrete entities which ensure that things can't pop into existence out of nothing. So either your principle is just a principle, it's causally inefficacious, or itself is just a necessary cause. But you already argued that necessary causes don't prevent chaos. So it's going to be a dichotomy. Either it's just a descriptive principle, in which case it can't cause anything, can't constrain reality, or it's necessary cause, in which case it is you argued it can't constrain reality.
So I don't really get where you're getting this idea from that only causes can constrain reality. Like, it doesn't. I mean, maybe you have an argument for that or something, right? But it seems to me like explanations can just as well constrain what goes on in reality, right? Like, I mean, if God is necessary, that's just the explanation of his existence, right? Like, there is no cause for God, and there is no cause for why there doesn't exist alongside God another God with a slightly different set of properties, right? Like a quadrinity or whatever. Right? It seems like that's possibility is ruled out by some explanatory principle rather than some causal principle. So that's the first.
Well, explanations are just descriptive. They're also always supposed to describe something. In this case, you have God, who's a concrete entity. God is omnipotent. God is incompatible with the existence of other entities because he just has these powers, which, such as omnipotence. There's no other entity which could have the power of omnipotence. But your principle is just a principle with which doesn't describe any concrete entities. So it can't constrain reality in the same way God can, because God actually has causal powers.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I'd like to switch to a different
I wanted
topic.
to respond. So you made this point earlier about how, you know, the special property of the universe would come into effect too late to distinguish the universe from something else which began to exist. Right, like, let's say I try to say the universe began to exist uncaused because it has the special property, let's say, necessity. Right, like that arrives to the party too late to explain why only the universe began to exist rather than, not something else. I think that this idea that God can constrain other gods from coming into existence suffers from the exact same problem, right? Like, sure, God has omnipotence to maybe guarantee that nobody else comes alongside him to take away that omnipotence or whatever, right? But God already needs to exist to do that. And that seems to me to be just as much too late to the explanatory order as what you've pointed out of the universe. And so it seems to me like, yeah, you need explanations to be able to constrain things from doing other things, right? Like the causal power of God is not enough.
Yeah, I disagree, and I'm going to give you an analogy. Suppose you can have a fire beginning to exist without a cause. Now, the fact that there's no oxygen is still compatible with fire beginning to exist because fire doesn't need a cause. So you can have just fire existing, pop into existence out of thin air if fire can begin to exist uncaused. The fact that there's no oxygen is just irrelevant. But not so with beginningless fire. If there's an eternal universe, or let's say there's an eternal entity in which no oxygen exists, such a state is incompatible with the existence of fire. So an eternal or a beginningless entity, which is omnipotent, is incompatible with the existence of anything else. Sorry, which is equally omnipotent or which can exert power over it or influence over it. So the type of so when you appeal to uncaused entities, well, there's no explanation why beginningless fires can't exist if there's no oxygen. Sorry, if you appeal to causeless entities, there's no explanation of how fires can't just pop into existence without oxygen. But if there's a beginningless fire and one of the necessary conditions for a fire is that oxygen exists, then such a state, fire existing, is incompatible with lack of oxygen. So I think there's an asymmetry.
So that wasn't super clear to me, but let me just ask you, right? Like, why is it that the God you believe in exists in this timeless, initially changeless state, beginninglessly, instead of some other really powerful entity? Like, what explains that?
Because I think God is the greatest conceivable being, and presumably one of the properties of a greatest conceivable being is that it doesn't depend on anything else for its existence, is that it's omnipotent, and if it has these properties, then it can't coexist with any other entity, which can influence, which can exert power over it, or can affect it, or which can exert power over it.
Yes, I think this is a sort of confusion because there is an entity out there, and whether it's a perfect entity is going to be a matter of whether it's able to meet up to this idea of perfection you have, right? It's not the other way around. It's like, doesn't really make sense to say, well, why is he single? Well, because he's not with anyone. He doesn't have a partner, right? Like, I mean, you kind of explained it, but really you just told me a definition, right? I don't understand why that object in the world, the person, is not actually dating anybody, right? It's just, you told
Yeah,
me
it just
something
follows
really
from the
trivial.
definition of God. God is just defined as the greatest conceivable being. It's greater to not to exist necessarily. That is not depend on anybody else for your existence and be the source of all other being. Than if you depend on other things, and if you're not the source of all other entities, and therefore just definitionally God exists, and God's existence is incompatible with the existence of some other omnipotent entity or some other entity which God can't influence.
Yes, I think this is the same confusion as well, right? Like, you might think that a tiger is defined in terms of a certain genotype or phenotype or whatever, right? And if you ask, like, why does this particular entity have this phenotype, right? I mean, you can say, well, it's because it's a tiger, but given the definition, it's just not an interesting explanation, right? I mean, you just told me something that's like, given the properties of this entity, it just meets up to this idea that I have in my mind of what something, like that should be called. Right? It doesn't explain why the things
Sorry,
out there in the
can you
world.
repeat? Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's easier with the other example, right? If I ask you, why is John single? And you just tell me, well, it's because he doesn't have a partner, right? I mean, you've kind of answered, right? But really what you've told me is what being single amounts to, right? It doesn't tell me why that thing in the world out there really is single, right? It's not that kind of explanation. You just told me some definition that followed.
Oh, I
right?
see.
I mean, whether a definition is applicable to a thing or not depends on what the thing is like. Whether God is perfect or not depends on how it is, not the other way around.
Okay, I see. So, why you can just use the modal ontological argument? Specifically, if it's possible for God to exist, then it's necessarily possible. If it's necessarily possible, that means it's possible for a being to exist in at least one possible world, and that being is a necessary entity, which means he exists in all possible worlds according to S5 logic. Now, if you just say a tiger exists just because it's utterly mysterious why a tiger would exist, but the modal ontological argument sheds light on why such an entity would need to exist, because it just follows from its definition.
Yeah, I mean, there's like obvious problems with that argument, right? One is just that it seems to me possible that God doesn't exist, right? And it's going to turn out that he necessarily doesn't exist.
Just an epistemic
So
possibility.
we can put that to the I mean, sure. What kind of possibility do you have in mind when you said it's possible?
Like metaphysical.
Yeah, but that just amounts to say that he exists, right? Like, I sort of don't see how you're not begging the question. Right? Like, I mean, if you think,
I
God
mean,
exists,
you
then
assigned,
he-
you used the principle of indifference at the beginning of the argument. I think you assigned 50-50 odds to a divine being existing.
that wasn't. I assigned 50-50 too.
Okay. So suppose there are two hypotheses. One hypothesis is that the beginning of the universe is a godlike entity. The other hypothesis it's a non-godlike entity. So what do you think? How do you think you should assign probabilities?
I might do it 50-50. I might be more inclined to say that it's not a godlike entity because I think there are issues with that kind of entity.
Do you think the possibilities are zero?
You mean epistemic possibilities? What my credence is?
Yeah. Do you think the possibility is zero?
I'm asking what kind of possibility.
Whichever you have in mind.
It's your argument. What do you mean?
Well, I'm asking you a question.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It's underspecified, right? Like if I say, did he go to the store, and you ask me, oh, who is he? And I say, I don't know. Well, it's like I didn't even ask you a question, really.
Suppose.
Sorry, 90 seconds left.
Okay, cool.
Seems to me you need to say that God is utterly impossible for the argument not to go through.
What kind of possibility do you have in mind when you say that?
What kind of possibility? I have. I think epistemic possibility is a rough guide to metaphysical possibility.
You're just talking about epistemic possibility, right? But then it doesn't follow that I have to have zero probability and to rule out God, right? Might have like 10% probability, and it's still going to be a good guide to saying, well, God doesn't exist, as being probably metaphysically impossible.
Well, saying there's a
false.
10% probability of God existing, if you think epistemic possibility is a rough guide to metaphysical possibility, it's just saying that it's metaphysically possible. There's a 10% metaphysical probability of God existing.
I mean, that's kind of strange, right? Like, what do you think is the probability that the causal principle is false? Right? Like, what's the probability that that metaphysical principle is false? What credence do you assign to that? I mean, like, if you say like, oh, it's
I signed like maybe like 0.1%. Actually,
if you think that it's a good guy.
0%.
Okay, so you just think that.
Can we leave that? Can we leave that on 0%?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I guess you can carry over your responses to your closing statements if you want. So, that's 5 minutes. Jacob, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, can you take over the timekeeping for the closing statements?
Okay, how many minutes?
It's 5 minutes apiece. Agamemnon starts.
Okay, that's fine.
Cheers.
Yeah. So essentially, my opponent is trying to argue that it makes sense that things can pop into existence out of thin air for no reason at all. That's essentially what he's trying to argue. So whatever arguments he's going to give, that God is intrinsically improbable, that beginning to exist isn't defined well. Well, we have to interpret that in the light that essentially his position is that a collection not only we shouldn't have the expectation that Eskimo villages shouldn't pop out of thin air. In fact, a whole collection of things, rabbits, Eskimo villages, etc., etc., there's no expectation these things shouldn't pop out of thin air. he didn't give any good arguments against the idea that things which began to exist in either cause. He didn't reply to the. He actually conceded the argument. He conceded that the inductive evidence provides evidence for the causal principle. He never gave any counter arguments. In fact, he explicitly said that the inductive evidence seems to support it. So onto the other premise: universe began to exist. Well, the fact that the universe began, he never gave any counter arguments to the thermodynamic argument that I gave. The argument from thermodynamics was simply that since randomness in the universe is a finite quantity, if the universe existed forever according to the second law of thermodynamics, if randomness was forever increasing, the randomness in the universe should be at a maximum. This is not what we observed. Therefore, the universe is not past infinite. So that was the second premise. So the universe had a cause. He never gave a counter argument to the idea that the universe, the cause of the universe, must have these divine properties. So, for instance, if the initial state of the universe was non-minded, he has to give an explanation of how the subsequent states of the universe can possess things like consciousness, the moral domain, why we should do anything, why there's fine-tuning in the universe, why there's rationality, etc., etc., etc. His two strategies either could be that to reject all these things, I didn't hear him say that, or to give a body double worldview, which is to accept that all these things exist, except he thinks the ground of all these things is a non-minded entity, something like a proposition. But he never responded to my argument that propositions, first of all, they lack any explanatory virtues. They can't explain why we ought to do. If there's a proposition that you should help the poor, why should we help the poor? There's no reason to. He never responded to the idea that propositions can't explain your knowledge of the moral domain. They can't explain why you know certain moral principles, because propositions are supposed to be acausal. The only argument he has is this is not a form of the KALAM. But Andrew Locke gives a very similar argument. He uses the fine-tuning argument to support the second stage of the KALAM, and he argues explicitly that it's still a version of the KALAM because it establishes that the universe had a cause, and further in the second stage establishes that the cause of the universe must be divine. So I can see the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you, Sasha. You can go next.
Are you going to start the time when I start
Yeah,
speaking?
when you start speaking. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so a couple of things, right? I mean, this idea that you assign probability 0 to the causal principle being false is sort of insane to me, right? It seems misguided to provide inductive evidence for it, right? Like, inductive evidence can't get you to probability 1. I mean, it just sounds like, I have no idea how he's getting it, and it just seems like he's only doing it to get around this metaphysical possibilities being well guided by epistemic possibilities. So I wanted to just note that from the end of the discussion. Okay, so I'm not saying things can pop into existence. I've appealed to a principle which I think rules that out. And furthermore, I also have shown how Agamemnon's principle, the causal principle, doesn't rule out things just popping into existence, right? That was the point about the equimobility in the universe being the necessary causal condition. So it seems like that's kind of inverse how we would expect, but whatever. I did respond in my opening to the inductive support, right? That was the point about how that inductive evidence is matched by equally strong inductive evidence against conjoint premises, right? So every material object has a cause. Sorry, every material object that has a cause has a material cause. Every concrete object has at least a partial causal explanation. Every causal relation is temporal. Every event has a preceding event. Every mind has a body, right? My response to the causal principle and its inductive support is that if the causal principle is well supported inductively. All these other principles are also supported inductively just as well, and they turn out to lead to the falsity of what the proponent of the Kalam is arguing in their case. I have offered an argument for why the cause is unminded, right? I said that there is strong inductive support for all minds being embodied, right? Having bodies. That does seem to pretty strongly go against, a disembodied mind like God being the cause of the universe. So then he said that I didn't respond to. I mean, basically, it was the fine tuning, the moral, and the argument from logic, right? I didn't respond to those arguments. I mean, seems like really an unreasonable expectation for me to address all these arguments. Also, I mean, he offered a version of the ontological argument alongside addressing the Kalam argument. Okay, there's also this point about propositions not being able to cause anything, right? Like he mentioned that in his closing statement, right? Where I mean, the reason why people think that the number 4 and like other Platonic objects couldn't influence your beliefs about them is because those things are outside of space-time, right? It's sort of nonsensical to say, oh, where's the number 7? Oh, it's just taking up a stroll in Nevada. But so the idea is those things can't cause things because they're outside of space-time. But then Agamemnon thinks that God, who was outside of space-time, caused the universe to begin, right? So I don't really see how he can appeal to that motivation. I mean, just last point, right? I think he basically conceded the chaos argument by saying that he thinks that his causal principle doesn't rule out chaos, and sort of resorted to a tu quoque by saying that, well, how would I rule out chaos? And he can point out how my story doesn't do that. Yeah, that's just conceding your argument, right? I mean, there was also plenty of stuff that wasn't addressed in my case, right? It seems like the thermodynamics argument I can just let through, right? I can say, sure, you can have a universe be past finite. So I can grant that argument, and I can still say it might not meet the model condition, right? There might be a fundamentally atemporal part of the universe.
You have like
which
one
suffices for
one minute more.
Okay. Yeah, so I might still say, yeah, even if given that argument, the universe has a first moment, it still might fail to meet the model condition, right? It might still have an atemporal fundamental part, which suffices for its existence. So I don't feel particularly inclined to address that argument. Not that I think it's really good anyway. Okay, that's my closing statement. Thank you for attending the event. Thank you for the judges for being present here. And thank you to my opponent for making the event possible.
Okay, thank you everyone for
All right,
coming.
great. Yeah, thank you everyone for participating. And
Okay,
to
so
interlocutors, yeah, go on.
I think the idea was that you guys, the judges, would like separately discuss amongst yourself who you think did better, and in the meantime we can take some questions from the audience. I don't know if we're still doing that.
Do you want to take? Okay, so do you guys want to do the Q&A by allowing people to come up and ask questions, or do you want
Yeah,
to
but there
take
was
questions from
this
the
point
audience?
that like the Q&A section shouldn't interfere with your guys' judgment, right? So it's like
I think. Wait, the Q&A section isn't supposed to.
Well, I'll
as
tell you
in
what I'll
like
Be
do.
here for the Q&A
Hold on.
section.
Wait. Oh, sorry. Say again.
I think they can be here for the Q&A section because I feel like the person who ended the debate made a whole bunch of points. Sorry, who spoke last made a whole bunch of points, which obviously I'm not able to respond to if the judges are not here. So I think the Q&A section should be a part of the judge.
yeah, I mean that wasn't part of the agreement, so
Judge.
Yeah.
it seems
Okay.
again like a weird move.
Yeah.
Well,
Hold on. So that was.
we didn't
Hold
talk
on.
about
Hold on,
that.
guys. Right. So that wasn't the agreed upon structure.
Wait,
So see. Yeah. So that wasn't right.
did we even talk about that?
We didn't know. That's what I'm saying. So it wasn't agreed upon. That's what I mean. It wasn't
So
agreed upon.
it's open, right? It's open whether the judges want to be here or they don't want to be here.
Well, no, it's just to
Um,
say that if you want the decision, the judge's decision, and you want us to confer amongst ourselves, then obviously it would be difficult for you to have this judge Q&A period that you requested. So, and given that I think there's time constraints on us all. You mentioned you had some earlier as well, Agamemnon. I think the judges should just convene now. Do you guys want to end this room and do like a separate room for the judging, or do you guys just want to do you want me to bring up maybe Rob or something as a moderator and leave
yeah,
this
so
room
but
open
you
while we
guys are doing the
discuss?
moderation. You guys are doing the judge in a private room, right?
Right, that's what I'm saying. So
Yeah, yeah,
like,
okay, yeah.
so
So
let's
yeah, bring
close
up
this
maybe
room.
Rob, and then he can
Okay,
like
okay,
moderate the Q&A.
all right. Well, Agamemnon is refusing to have the Q&A if the
Oh, okay,
judges
that's
aren't
fine. That's
present.
fine. Then we can do
No,
that.
Well, I
no, I'm
mean, you guys.
not. No, I'm not
Okay,
refusing.
okay, you guys can have the decision. Sorry, you guys can have the discussion. It's just not going to impact the judging decision. You happy with that?
Yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
All right, cool.
I think Sasha made a whole bunch of points that the inductive evidence for the second premise is outweighed by other inductive evidence. So, for instance, I think he said everybody
It's
is
the first premise,
minded.
sorry.
Sorry, first, second, whatever. Everybody is minded. Every material thing has a material cause, but we have counterexamples. So for instance, let's say people report near-death experiences
No,
in
but you're
which,
confusing what the principle is. I said it's
well, I'd like to finish.
every mind has a body. That's the principle.
Yeah, every mind has a body. So let's say it's the case that people report near-death experiences in which their body is non-functional, yet they continue to report consciousness. Well, that's a counterexample to the inductive principle that the inductive evidence that you brought up. So obviously, you can have your intuitions. You can have your intuitions that every mind requires a body, but if there's a counterexample, then you can't claim that this principle is it's based on intuition.
No, it
Or
wasn't the principle based on intuition. That was
okay,
principle based on
there's a
induction.
counterexample. We have inductive counterexamples. Second, every material object has a material cause. Well, look here in physics. There are standardly
No,
accepted
that wasn't the
theories.
principle either. It's that.
What was the
I'll
principle?
read it out to you because I think you're misconstruing it. So it's every material object that has a cause has a material cause. That was the idea.
Every material object which has a cause has a material cause.
Right.
But look, there are counterexamples, specifically space and time, according to some construals of physics, might be emergent from or caused by a non-material thing. So again, we have counterexamples to the supposed inductive evidence you're giving.
But
So
you
that's not
said
true.
space and time to be material objects.
Yeah, space and time are material object, and whatever cause space and time is supposed to be non-material on some standard construals of some physical thing. So you don't have any inductive evidence, inductive counter evidence, but you did concede that the inductive evidence supports the second premise. So the second premise is likely true that the first premise is likely true that whatever begins to exist has a cause. Second, you conceded that the universe began to exist. Did you
I
not?
didn't concede that. No.
Oh, well, hold on. Did you not say that your view is that, oh, you didn't give it a counter argument to the thermodynamic argument? You're just happy to like let it slide?
No, that's not what I said. I said that I can grant you past finitude. It just won't get you to the universe having a beginning because the universe could still fail to meet the model condition.
Okay,
Guys,
well,
let me just check in with you guys. Are you
if
not
you're
going to
conceding
do
past
Q&A
finitude,
here?
Oh yeah, I did want to do Q&A actually.
if you're
That's very
conceding
much
past finitude, that's just my definition of beginning to exist, because anything with temporal edges begins to exist. Actually, conceding the second premise.
No, but look, that's not like you can define beginning to exist any way you want, right? You can say that the universe existing is sufficient
Okay, well,
for
hang
having a
on,
beginning.
guys. Yeah, let's just
Very
stop here for a moment. Look, if it's going to be a Q&A, then either people are going to ask text in the chat or we're going to bring people up for a Q&A. What did you guys agree? So I'm not clear
I
what
think
you
people
agreed here.
can come up to ask their
No,
questions.
I
There
think
was
they
agreed,
should
so.
post it. Just post it in chat.
Well, the other option is people are saying, should we start a new room? Because now you've got the debate that's on record. This is going to go on for hours and hours. You can either do it in this room or
Well,
I
I
can
don't
just
think it's
start
going to go
another
on
one.
for that long, right? I think it's probably better if that
Well, then you give me
ending part.
you tell me how long you want to do it and I'll keep you to time in terms of a Q&A.
Look, this is not like the formal part of the debate, right? This doesn't impact the judging, so I don't think there's much reason to be really
Okay.
strict about it.
Okay, so you don't mind either way, either of you then? If this room carries on for another hour, 2 hours, whatever, or whatever the case is, that
Yeah,
that
I
right?
completely concur.
How about you, Agamemnon? Have you got some thought on this?
I think it probably should be moved to a different room because if people come on stage, a lot of these people are going to have me blocked. So then I can't watch replays.
Still do it in browser, I'm pretty sure, but I mean, that I don't mind.
All right, I think to make it clean, let me do that. I need to go off. So, Andrew, I don't know if you are there. I'll just bring you up or somebody up. I have invited you just so that I can go and set up another room, and I'll just do Aga and Sasha KALAM debate Q&A / after show, however you want to say it, because it's not impacting the judging. There we go, Andrew. There you are. Let me just make you a moderator. So I will just go do another one, Andrew. Then I'll post you the link. Then close this. Everybody goes over. Then we've got a clean debate. Then the Q&A can come up. We can invite people on stage. We'll try and moderate that so that only Agamemnon and Sasha answer questions. And did you guys agree how you're going to answer it? In other words, if a question is posed to Aga, does Sasha get to answer it and vice versa? Or how did you agree Q&A?
I think we agreed.
Whichever, just maybe free discussion would be fine.
I don't need a disguise. Always leaving demons bloody and the devil with black eyes. In Jesus' name, evil spirits are bind. Hog time with barbed wire, not twine.